Riyadh, September 2025. The cameras click, the pens move, and in the gilded halls of Riyadh a new line is drawn across the Middle East and South Asia. On September 17, 2025, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia sign what they call a Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. The handshake looks routine, the ceremony polite. But beneath the surface, this document rearranges the security map of two regions at once. It isn't just a defense pact. It's a signal. Riyadh is diversifying, Islamabad is stepping up, and the future of regional security will not run on old assumptions. Why now? The timing of the Pakistan-Saudi Defense Pact is no coincidence. In geopolitics, treaties rarely emerge from calm seas, they surface in the turbulence of crisis. And in September 2025, the Gulf was in turbulence. Just a week before the signing, the region was shaken by Israeli airstrikes on Doha, a shockwave that reverberated across every capital from Manama to Muscat. For decades, the Gulf monarchies had relied on a simple formula: the United States as guarantor, Israel as rival, and local politics as manageable. That formula cracked under the roar of jet engines over Qatar. Suddenly, the Gulf was reminded of a truth it had tried to forget: security guarantees can be conditional, delayed, or even absent when they are most needed. The strikes were more than a tactical event, they were a strategic alarm bell. Gulf leaders looked westward, toward Washington, and saw hesitation. They saw a United States distracted by great power rivalry with China, bogged down in domestic polarization, and less willing to police every crisis in the Middle East. They understood that America was not disappearing, but it was no longer the sole pillar of regional defense. For Saudi Arabia, the answer was diversification. Spread the bets. Anchor security not on a single ally but on a network of relationships. Some with Western powers, some with Eastern partners, and some within the Muslim world itself. And who better than Pakistan? A nation with the sixth largest army in the world, deep combat experience, a professional officer corps long integrated with Saudi structures, and, most significantly, the possession of nuclear weapons. Even if the treaty never mentions that last fact, its shadow hovers over every conversation. For Pakistan, the timing was equally fortuitous. Its economy had endured years of turbulence. Currency crises, inflation, IMF bailouts. Islamabad needed not only financial stability but also strategic relevance. Too often in global forums, Pakistan found itself overshadowed by India or typecast by its internal struggles. The pact with Riyadh offered a chance to reassert itself as a frontline state in Muslim geopolitics, to transform decades of quiet military cooperation into something formal, codified, and headline-making. And this was no sudden affair. The seeds were planted over 60 years of partnership. Pakistani trainers had rotated through Saudi bases since the 1960s, instructing pilots, officers, and ground troops. Saudi cadets had studied in Pakistan's academies, learning tactics and doctrine. Entire Pakistani contingents had been stationed in the kingdom at various points, defending its borders during tense moments with Yemen and Iran. What had been informal, habitual, even taken for granted, this living bridge between the two militaries, was now given a spine of treaty law. Habit became architecture. So why now? Because the illusion of permanent stability was shattered. Because Riyadh realized that a single pillar, America, was no longer enough. Because Islamabad needed to convert goodwill into contracts, and contracts into leverage. Because 60 years of quiet cooperation had matured into something the region could no longer ignore. The pact was less a beginning than a culmination, the formal unveiling of a relationship that had been building brick by brick for decades. The clause that matters. Treaties are usually thick with technical language, but this one hinges on a single line: any aggression against either country shall be considered aggression against both. It's a clause that sounds almost NATO-like. It doesn't spell out nuclear weapons, but everyone notices the elephant in the room. Pakistan is the only Muslim-majority country with a nuclear arsenal. Suddenly, whispers of a nuclear umbrella appear in media and policy circles. Officials deny, analysts debate. The ambiguity becomes part of the deterrence. What matters isn't what's written, it's what adversaries fear might be true. What's inside the pact? The published text is sparse, but conversations with officials and the history of cooperation make the likely contents clear. Contingency planning, joint exercises, mapped out defensive scenarios, and coordination on protecting critical infrastructure like oil fields, desalination plants, and ports. Force rotations, Pakistani air defense units, special operations advisors, and infrastructure protection teams stationed in Saudi Arabia on rotation. Defense industry cooperation, co-production of munitions and UAVs, joint maintenance hubs and technology transfer. Intelligence and cyber cells, combined monitoring of missile launches, drone activity, maritime movements and cyber threats to energy infrastructure. These aren't just symbolic gestures. They're real, logistical changes that shorten the response time if either side comes under fire. What Saudi Arabia gains. For Riyadh, the signing of the pact is not just another entry in its list of international agreements. It is a structural shift in how Saudi Arabia conceives its own defense. For decades, the kingdom's strategy has been procurement-based. Buy the most advanced weapons systems from the United States or Europe, field them at home, and rely on American contractors and expertise to keep them running. The formula worked well enough, but it created dependency. Patriot batteries and THAAD interceptors could shoot down missiles, but only if Washington kept supplying spare parts, crews and software updates. The pact with Pakistan represents something qualitatively different. It is about partnership rather than purchase. Saudi Arabia doesn't just gain equipment. It gains people, planners and political willpower from a country that has fought long wars and knows the rhythm of real combat. Pakistani advisors and soldiers bring not only hardware but experience honed in asymmetric battlefields, from the tribal belts of the Northwest to UN missions in Africa. This translates into redundancy, the first and most obvious benefit. In a crisis, Saudi Arabia can now count on more than one safety net. If US forces are stretched or politically constrained, Pakistani units already embedded in the kingdom can act, supplementing Saudi defenses at short notice. This dual layer of protection makes the kingdom harder to intimidate. The second gain is leverage. Riyadh's message to Washington is subtle but unmistakable: we have options. It doesn't mean cutting ties with America, far from it. Saudi defense ties are too deep to unravel. But it does mean Saudi Arabia is no longer willing to be a security monopoly customer. By showing it can build pacts with Muslim-majority states like Pakistan, Riyadh signals that it can diversify its defense menu, forcing Washington to keep Saudi interests high on the agenda. And the third gain, perhaps the most consequential, is deterrence. Adversaries like Iran must now calculate not only Saudi retaliation but also Pakistani involvement. Iran already struggles with Saudi, Emirati, U.S. coalitions. The possibility, even if unspoken, that Pakistani manpower, planning and possibly nuclear-linked deterrence could enter the equation complicates Tehran's calculus. For a state whose doctrine often leans on bold gambits and calibrated risk-taking, this added uncertainty is a brake on escalation. For Saudi Arabia, therefore, the pact is not just symbolic. It is a quiet revolution in strategy. From buying protection to sharing protection, from outsourcing defense to co-owning it with a trusted partner. What Pakistan gains. For Pakistan, the pact is nothing short of a geopolitical windfall. In one stroke, Islamabad elevates its role from being a useful but peripheral actor in Gulf security to being a named guarantor of one of the region's most powerful states. That shift comes with tangible and intangible rewards. The tangible begins with economic relief. Pakistan's economy has been battered by inflation, currency volatility, and external debt. Saudi Arabia has long provided lifelines, oil on deferred payments, deposits into Pakistan's central bank, investment pledges. The pact cements this financial umbilical cord into something more reliable. For Islamabad, the logic is clear. By offering soldiers and strategic commitment, it secures financial breathing space at home. Next comes strategic relevance. For years, Pakistan has struggled with a kind of diplomatic invisibility. Overshadowed by India's global rise, Islamabad often found itself reactive rather than proactive. By becoming Riyadh's formal defense partner, Pakistan forces itself back onto the international stage. Every Gulf crisis now carries a Pakistan angle, every Iranian calculation a Pakistan clause. This relevance is not just prestige, it translates into diplomatic leverage in forums from the OIC to the UN. Then there is deterrence insurance. For decades, Pakistan has feared encirclement, an aggressive India to the east, a restless Afghanistan to the west, and economic pressure from all sides. The defense pact means that in any confrontation with India, Riyadh now has a treaty-based stake in Pakistan's security. Even if Saudi Arabia never intervenes directly, its financial and political weight is a deterrent to those who might hope to isolate Pakistan in a crisis. Perhaps most importantly, the pact changes perception. Pakistan has long been seen as a junior partner in Gulf security, useful for manpower, training, and symbolic Muslim solidarity, but not as a co-equal. The defense pact flips that script. Islamabad is now recognized in Riyadh as a partner, not just a provider. That shift in perception may be Pakistan's greatest gain, because perception in geopolitics shapes behavior. For Pakistan then, the pact is not charity. It is transactional, transformational, and timely, a move that ties economic relief to strategic status in one sweep. The shadows, who loses? Not every capital celebrates the Riyadh-Islamabad handshake. For some, the pact redraws the map in unsettling ways. First and foremost, Iran. Tehran has always viewed Saudi Arabia as a rival, sometimes a foe. Its doctrine relies on exploiting asymmetries, using drones, missiles, and regional proxies to apply pressure without sparking direct war. By bringing Pakistan formally into Saudi Arabia's defensive perimeter, the pact narrows Iran's room for maneuver. Tehran now faces the possibility of Pakistani troops, intelligence, and planning feeding into Riyadh's response. This raises the cost of escalation in the Gulf or Red Sea. The irony is sharp. In seeking to checkmate Saudi Arabia, Iran may find itself staring at an expanded chessboard. Then comes India. Delhi has cultivated deep energy ties with the Gulf and has long counted Saudi Arabia among its pragmatic partners. The defense pact doesn't sever those ties, but it does complicate them. If a South Asian crisis erupts, India must now consider that Riyadh has a treaty-based interest in Pakistan's security. Even if Saudi Arabia insists on neutrality, the perception of tilt could influence India's energy planning, its diaspora policies, and its diplomatic choices. For Delhi, the pact is a reminder that Gulf politics and South Asian rivalries are increasingly intertwined. Finally, there is the United States. Washington doesn't lose influence overnight. The U.S.-Saudi military relationship is too entrenched. But it does lose exclusivity. For decades, Gulf security was a U.S.-anchored monopoly. Now it is becoming a multipolar marketplace. Saudi Arabia can call Washington for advanced interceptors, Islamabad for trained soldiers, Beijing for drones, and Ankara for UAV tech. For U.S. planners, the pact is less about betrayal than about dilution. It signals that Gulf states are no longer willing to put all their eggs in the American basket. These shadows are real. They represent unease, recalibration, and in some cases outright suspicion. But they also highlight why the pact is significant, because it changes assumptions, forces actors to rethink strategies, and proves that in geopolitics, two signatures on a treaty can redraw the mental map of entire regions. The red lines. 3 risks could undermine the pact if not carefully managed. Nuclear ambiguity. If Pakistani officials lean too heavily into the nuclear umbrella narrative, adversaries may escalate preemptively. Over-entanglement. Pakistan cannot afford to drain forces from its Indian front. Saudi Arabia cannot appear to outsource its security. Third-party provocations. Delhi, Tehran, or even non-state actors may probe the pact to test its limits. Hotlines and crisis management protocols are vital. A crisis scenario. Picture this. A swarm of drones strikes near a Saudi desalination plant. Within hours, Pakistani air defense units already stationed in the kingdom are deployed. Saudi and Pakistani radars coordinate coverage. Maritime patrols tighten around the Red Sea. A joint statement is issued. Defensive measures under the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement are in effect. The adversary now faces a choice: escalate and risk both Riyadh and Islamabad, or pull back. The value of the pact isn't in dramatic counterstrikes. It's in making opponents hesitate. The long game. If crises stretch from days into weeks, the pact's deeper structure shows its worth. Rotational deployments prevent fatigue. Shared maintenance hubs keep air defenses and drones operational. Joint messaging frames the conflict as collective defense, not sectarian rivalry. The long-term effect: stability through predictability. Ripple effects. The pact does not sit in isolation, it triggers waves. In the Gulf, expect more minilateral pacts. UAE with Egypt. Qatar with Turkey. Each state tailoring its own security quilt. In South Asia, India accelerates its own Gulf diplomacy to keep ties warm. For Israel, the calculus of striking Gulf targets becomes more complex. Every action risks activating more than one opponent. For Washington, the opportunity is to shape, not resist. By plugging into the new architecture with intel sharing and deconfliction, the US can stay relevant while partners shoulder more load. The 5 wrong takes. It's anti-US, no, it's diversification. Gulf security is becoming multi-anchored. It's a Saudi nuclear guarantee. No, it's deliberate ambiguity without doctrine. It's just symbolic. Wrong. The logistics back-end rotations, maintenance, drills, is where the power lives. It sidelines India permanently. Not true. It complicates India's playbook but also pushes Delhi to deepen its Gulf ties. It invites war. On the contrary, it raises the price of adventurism, making war less likely. The signals to watch. If you want to track whether the pact is real or rhetorical, watch for published joint exercises, announcements of co-production projects, visible rotations of Pakistani trainers, cyber and intelligence MOUs, maritime patrol patterns around choke points. These are the telltale signs that the pact is more than paper. The map redrawn. Maps don't just change when borders move. They change when assumptions move. The Pakistan-Saudi Defense Pact redraws assumptions. Tehran must calculate higher cost. Delhi must recalibrate its Gulf diplomacy. Washington must share space with new constellations. In Riyadh, two pens signed a line. On paper it was a treaty. In reality it was a message. The age of single guarantors is ending. Security now speaks many languages and one of them is Urdu.